everybody, and welcome back to Psychedelics Today. This is Joe Moore coming at you from Breckenridge, Colorado, joined by Kyle. Kyle, how you doing?
Not too bad, Joe. How are you doing today?
Pretty good. You and I had a wonderfully exciting morning. We got to record with Stan and Birgitta Groff.
Yeah, it was
so that
really
podcast
awesome.
will come in 2022. Really psyched to bring it to you all. A lot of gems in there, and Stan is doing great. It was really just lovely to connect with him again. It's been years and years.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, it won't stop snowing here, which is my speed. You guys snowed in yet?
No, not at all. We're getting rain and kind of warm weather. I think it's supposed to be like 50-something tomorrow. I was hoping to get out on the snowboard, but not great weather.
Yeah. Coming from New Hampshire, I always had this thing about like anything south of Connecticut is considered the South for me, because it's always so cold where I was, and anything like New York, Connecticut, and beyond is so warm. So it's like I would always say like the Mason-Dixon line, but it's obviously a joke, people. But
Well, surprisingly, sometimes when I was in Burlington, it would be colder down here than up there. Some winters, depending on what was going on. But I remember checking.
Oh, that makes sense. Like different jet stream directions and cold fronts from the north. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Burlington, I just visualize people freezing to death all the time, but
Pretty cold up there.
all right, man. So I think what we should talk about first is January 6th. I think we've got 10 or 13 spots left total between our two cohorts. So you've got a week to make up your minds. Class kicks off January 6th. Webinars have been pretty full with interested parties, so I imagine we will sell out, and we're on track to. And if you want to join, please do. It's a beautiful program, foundations. We think it's this kind of material should be essential for people trying to jump into the space. And yeah, we'd love to have you. Beautiful 47-hour program, live supported by Kyle and I, and 12 hours of CE through the state of California. You have to confirm on your own if it works with your board, but
yeah, please do.
We've got all that text up there on how to do that. And it's just a great way to jumpstart your community, kind of double check assumptions, myths, and whatnot, and understand how broad this field is. It's a massive field.
Right? It's interdisciplinary.
Mm-hmm. Right. I found this actually really funny on one of the webinars last night. Everybody knows I have beef with almost everything, but somebody came in and is like, what kind of evidence-based practices? I want to know more about evidence-based practices used inside psychedelic psychotherapy sessions. And I'm like, immediately hung up going like, first, I hate that term. It's kind of just like greenwashing or marketing mumbo jumbo. It does mean something, but you can always make numbers lie. Numbers can say what you want to. It's only evidence-based. Well, that's not true. You can say something's evidence-based and ignore 20 studies that refute your stuff. So it's like, yeah, it's a helpful term.
Or what's getting funded and researched.
Totally. Like if we think about, CBT, for instance, is kind of like behaviorism, like the extensions of behaviorism. Like those are kind of like the primary offenders in that regard. Because looked at from a pure data point of view, like they're right. Like they're the easiest thing to study. They've got the cleanest data, but it's because there's no variables outside of behavior. Best I can tell. But how do you compare that to IFS, holotropic breath work? Working with the Midhofers in a PTSD study. Very different. And Stan and Birgitta were like, you kind of have to leave a lot of your baggage at the door. Like you could be Freudian, but that might not matter when you're working with somebody. You might have really all the somatic experiencing training.
Yeah, I think that's really hard to convey to a lot of people because it feels probably too loosey-goosey at times, but it's like when you're working with psyche in these like really expanded states, it's like, a lot of the stuff just kind of goes out the window.
Right. It doesn't look like normal language. It doesn't look like something you can draw a clean story around. But that's kind of why it's so beautiful, and I think why we're both so enamored of that process. Yeah. So
yeah, we're gonna have to find that special blend between like art and science with this work, I think.
right. You as individuals have to find your own path too, right? It's okay if you want to be a hardcore like data number person, but perhaps there's limitations there that you want to really account for. Yeah. So, that's one of the fundamental things we get into in the class is like, you kind of have to be model agnostic too. I think the Groff model allows kind of the ideal amount of flexibility for allowing people to have their own thing going, but that will evolve over time, right? Like, we're hopeful to continue evolving this stuff, and we'll see.
Well, even here in Stan and Brigitte to kind of talk about body work in our discussion and talking about like, sometimes we have certain techniques that we can utilize, but really it's following that owns the person's process, the participant's process. And I just remember being part of some of our breath or our body work trainings with Dream Shadow, and people have a really hard time grasping like this concept of doing, not doing, and following the process. It's like, no, there's got to be a special map here. There's got to be certain techniques that we have to do, and maybe that's just been our education for so long, where we're kind of put into these boxes, and there needs to be a strict, specific protocol around certain things and done a certain way.
Right. I feel like there was something I missed here, but yeah, largely this is really important stuff and spot on. And I learned a ton from those two this morning. A ton meaning clarification and kind of like maybe you move the knife like 2 degrees this way as you're talking kind of stuff, and it's like more poignant and more accurate. Like, I love these kind of like incremental improvements on accuracy as we talk about things. I find that amazing. So anyway, we got started because of Stan Groff, and a few other things, but primarily that. And it's just amazing that we got to pull it off finally, have him on, and, develop that conversation further.
I wish we were able to get him on before the stroke to have a more organic type of conversation, but I'm just glad that we were able to pull this off finally.
Totally. So thankful. Yeah. So thankful. Yeah. And it seems like he'll continue improving. So hopefully we can do more. What else here? Year end. A lot of things coming up in 2022 and a massive 21, right?
Yeah. Lots of cities and small towns have decriminalized plant medicines, lots of money coming into the space, lots of investments, conferences, a lot of just expansion and growth, it seems like. It's been a very busy year.
Totally. And we've seen like the, public companies in the Canadian Stock Exchange and some of the American ones spike in valuation, and then also fall substantially, and people kind of panicked. Like, what are we doing? Is this really the right industry for our money? Like, there's a lot of people kind of questioning that too, and I think that's healthy. Hype is lovely, but we shouldn't try to survive on hype, right? We should try to survive on authentic things. And I think the road is bright. Like, there are going to be drugs coming through. I'm not going to even talk about stock valuations because that's not really my game. I don't know shit about that. But, really, a lot of these companies have a hard uphill battle ahead of them to bring drugs all the way through the FDA, right?
A lot of them will probably fail, maybe.
I think there's going to be some acquisitions, maybe more than failures, but I think there will be some companies that just straight up quit. But, I'm hopeful that at least half of these companies are going to survive the next couple of years. Hopefully it becomes more affordable to do this research, like the DEA and FDA kind of put up hurdles around these particular drugs that make it more expensive to research them, and it's not been very helpful for us in the scene.
Maybe you're right there. Maybe not failure, but probably a lot more acquisitions happening and kind of IP moving around to different companies and consolidating efforts.
I think we're going to see all of it. Yeah. Like, it's going to be interesting, regardless of how it shakes out. And I saw like a telling post on Instagram last night that I want to kind of share. I thought this was helpful. Do you know who Steve D'Angelo is?
I don't think so, no.
He's really famous in the cannabis world. I don't exactly know what he's famous for, but he's got this.
I think I remember who he is.
This iconic look with braids, you know, and the hat, and the like, kind of like bowling hat, or what, I don't even actually know what to call that kind of hat. But he's been, you know, quite prolific contributor in California cannabis and cannabis globally. But a quote from him here: California equals the laughingstock of the cannabis world, the poster child for how not to legalize. Corporations, be warned. If you don't welcome legacy to legal, we will just stay outside the system and outcompete you for another 80 years. Right? Like, this is kind of relevant to us in the psychedelic world. So how can we include I guess what's called legacy operators in the cannabis world, because they don't want to suggest any illegality. But it's true, right? Like, when you start putting too many tests in place, too much taxation, underground operators are going to keep rolling if there's money to be made. You know, once I like this turn of phrase. Once I start buying Walmart acid in 30 years, if somebody's selling it, you know, outside of that place for, you know, a tenth the price, I might be tempted, even if it's outside the legal realm, right? Like, oh, like their manufacture process is still spot on, it's great, like nearly 100% purity, but I could buy it for that. Or maybe there's some boutique angles, right? Like,
yeah, I think there's big market in that. I mean, you just kind of see how a lot of like microbrews have been so popular over the past few years.
And the way people talk about cannabis too, right? Like,
yeah,
if you buy cannabis flower at a store, there's a good chance the selection isn't all that awesome, and the flower might be a little stale relative to what they wanted. A lot of people want freshly cured bud and flower, but that's not always what's for sale. So they'll go to their friend who's a boutique grower and pay sometimes equal price because there's no sales tax in these transactions. And they have something they actually want. So would we see this in mushrooms? We see it in beer and cannabis. Are we going to see it in mushrooms? Are we going to see it elsewhere? Like, I think yes.
Probably, yeah.
Right.
Trends seem to follow each other.
Totally. Like, it's not a perfect analogy, but, you know, I'm quite liberal about this. Like, Stan was kind of excited to let people go swimming on acid if you can figure that out. In the future, once people have adequate training and are resourced appropriately for that kind of thing. Like, I've been in pools on LSD. It's lovely. So, you know, why would I want to say you can't do that? You know, it's dangerous for sure a little bit. It certainly adds an element of danger, but, you know, it's how dangerous really, especially on the smaller doses. So once we have a safe supply, controlled dosing, that stuff becomes a little bit more practical and safer. And people don't like to hear this because they're all like, you know, the only thing that matters here is patient outcomes and medicalization, where I'm like, it's not the whole story, guys. Like, that's part of it. It's not the whole thing. Nothing's the whole story, right?
Yeah, I think, like, yeah. And I think Stan was even pointing towards like lower doses, right? So not taking like 500 mics and going swimming. That's obviously dangerous. That sounds like a problem. Yeah.
Unless you're a real trooper, but don't bet your life on it, people, because you never know. But yeah, like 20, 30 micrograms would probably be lovely. But, you know, culture's not there yet. Like, you can't necessarily go to the water park on acid and not get in trouble.
Sure, plenty of people do.
Right. Right. So you can hang out around that many children in an amusement park all day, I guess. Anyway, so that's the extent of that one. So all I'm saying is, be aware of legacy operators. If you're in this business, figure out ways of pulling them in and not excluding them. If you're trying to exclude legacy operators, underground people, manufacturer, etc., you're probably going to lose. Or not, you're not probably going to lose. You're at least going to have this major sector competing with you that you don't necessarily want to compete with you. I think we're going to see this in medicine. If like a treatment's $15,000+, of course there's going to be underground providers willing to offer that for half or quarter of that price, right?
Yeah.
Like, I'll gladly spend a week with somebody for $20,000 and like do all this, but are you going to get the same
especially
results
for
from a
people
MAPS
that
trial?
may have been around for a very long time and have a bunch of experience versus paying that much for like new, therapists that don't have much of a background and et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, totally. So I think that's enough on that point. I think you all get it. What else happened this year? Sexual assault allegations are flying around like crazy. People are getting called out for bad behavior all over. We've even seen some people get called out for non-sexual abuse or non-sexual misconduct as like a therapy-client relationship, and that's getting pretty loud. Those kinds of things can be handled by licensing boards, so I feel like, as long as nobody's going to jail, bring it to the licensing board. It's okay. And, in fact, people with licenses should kind of be checked on that stuff once in a while if they're violating boundaries too much, right?
Yeah. That's why the boards are there, right?
Totally. We've seen some stuff about patents being challenged. Compass Pathways is now being challenged in court. I think we're going to have a special on this somewhat soon, talking about the patent law. And there are some fears that we have in the community around patenting and trademarks around stuff. And what's a healthy limit? Like, do you want to just box out everybody so you have a monopoly? Some people do, and that's the play some people are making. Do you want a healthy ecosystem with hundreds of businesses? Most of you don't. Maybe. I don't know. Like, I do. I want thousands of psychedelic businesses worldwide. Yeah. Everybody developing in their own way, being, different kinds of ethical cohorts, right? Like you have the North Star Pledge Coalition and other groups doing their own version. Yeah. What else are we seeing? Yeah, the conferences. It was quite interesting to have 3 pretty big conferences mid-COVID.
Yeah.
Interestingly, I think Horizons was the biggest super spreader, even though New York had the most controls. I don't know exactly why that was, but yeah.
I don't know. Yeah, I think it was just, starting to get a little bit colder and cases were just kind of ramping up. I mean, it was literally like a week before cases just completely went crazy here on the East Coast and in the
that's a good point.
tri-state area. I mean,
I bet immune systems in the North we're starting to get depressed, and we're, Miami and Las Vegas, very different situations, right? Like hot, warm, comfortable, as opposed to like cold New York in the winter. Like, of course people are going to get sick. This is the first time a lot of people got together in like 2 years. So like, it's probably your body's first exposure to a lot of like exogenous viruses, bacteria, etc. Yeah. So, hopeful for next year. We'll see what happens event-wise. I was hopeful we were going to have an event in the first half of 2022 conference-wise, but it looks like that's not happening.
That's going to happening. Yeah.
I'm hopeful we'll be in Jamaica in May, but I don't know if we have firm plans yet around that. So we'll TBD, everybody. We'll let you know. What else? We've made a lot of new friends. We've done an extra episode since the beginning of quarantine, these Friday episodes. Oh yeah, this is a good transition. So we're going to try to slow down our Friday episodes for a bit, or just me and Kyle doing news and whatnot. We're going to have kind of more straight podcasts. So stay tuned for those. I'm sure they're going to be lovely. We got some really top tier talent coming in for the podcast, so please check those out. And, we are trying to figure out what the right proportion is for us to like comment on news as individuals versus, regular podcasts. So we'll pump the brakes. We'll get back to it probably in March. But yeah, a lot of extra additional podcast content coming your way, and I hope you like it. Yeah. And I guess, one of the big reasons why we're doing that, Kyle, do you want to discuss this whole thing you've been working on like crazy for many months now?
Yeah. So I think if you're on the MAPS newsletter for the therapist, you might have got a little preview. I don't know if we sent something out too, right, about this little preview. So we're
totally
launching a 12-month CERT program, and it's called Vital. So vital psychedelic training. So yeah, we're planning on launching this in March of 2022, and it's going to be a deep dive into psychedelic education. Really excited about it. It's going to be pretty intensive, I believe. So we're going to be meeting at least 2 times a week. One's going to be a 2-hour webinar special with special guests presenting on certain topics, and then we're going to break out into smaller kind of home groups, homerooms, where we can have more intimate conversations led by some of our core faculty. So, you'll be able to do some Q&A in the large webinars, and then have much more deeper interactions within these breakout groups. It's something that we've been really thinking about, of like, scalability, but also, one thing that we've been doing with navigating psychedelics for the past 2+ years, I guess, almost coming up on 3 years in May, is having small groups. So really trying to cap it around 20 people. And, it's to some degree, it's really great, but to others, it feels kind of limiting because we can't serve everybody that we'd want to serve. But, kind of keeping it capped off creates more of an intimate learning environment. And I don't know, I feel like most of my education, I've just been in small groups. Like I just think about like my undergrad experience. It was very, very small groups sitting around talking and really just digging into the material. And I really found that to be a nice way of learning versus just getting lectured at. So, I want to keep that ethos alive within this training, but also thinking about how can we have more people join as well. So yeah, it's going to be 12 months. I've been working on this for quite a while to some degree, and COVID put a pause on it. And, we kind of had to do a little bit of adapting here, and converted, most of it online. So it's going to be a hybrid course to the degree where we'll offer in-person experiential work. So it will have the online component where we'll study online, and then we'll have retreat options as well, where we'll be able to do possible legal psychedelic work if that's something that you're interested in and want to do, and then also breath work as well. So that will be a big theme and core experience within our retreats, is coming together, actually doing breath work, having an experience of having your experience, and also the experience of sitting with people. So you're kind of starting to get some hands-on training with being with people in what we would call like a holotropic state of consciousness. So yeah, we're excited. We have a wonderful lineup. You could check out our sales page. I guess it's in. Should we release this yet? I forget.
Yeah, it's fine. It's fine. Okay, it's fine. Cool. It's fine.
Yeah.
VitalPsychedelicTraining.com.
Yeah, VitalPsychedelicTraining.com. We're still updating it, so by the time this episode's launched, it's still kind of in its beta form. It will get updated within. We have our designers still working on some stuff, but you can go over there, check out who's going to be teaching. We have Ben Sessa, Rick Strassman, Bill Richards, Kylia Taylor, the Mythhoffers, Dick Schwartz from IFS, Sam Gandy, Adele of France, Bennett Zellner, Juliana Mulligan, Iezi Everett. Sorry, Iezi. I don't know why I'm stumbling over your name today. And then Omar Thompson, or Thomas, and then Dr. Michael Sapiro, and tons more. That's just kind of like a short list of people that we have up there right now. So yeah, I'm excited about it. It's going to be fun.
It's going to be a really big deal. I think it's going to be a game changer for psychedelic education generally. What I've noticed is a lot of the bigger organizations don't accept people with legacy operator experience, and we do. So if you want to work at a retreat center and you don't have a license, this training is good for you. If you're a psychiatrist working at UCLA or Harvard, this training is right for you. There's so many use cases for this material, and we just want more people trained. Again, there's no certification currently that just gives you a license carte blanche to prescribe MDMA or LSD to somebody, right? Like you have to be in certain organizations to do that kind of work, or you figure out what's legal and you do those things. do it where it's legal, how it's legal, and you're okay. And we talk about that a lot. And the intention was for us to develop the best possible training we could to compete with all the other major training groups. So if you want to learn more, Vital, psychedelictraining.com. You could apply. You can ask us questions. I'm sure January 7, we're going to do a whole bunch of big announcements more on this thing to help develop everybody's understanding more about what we're offering. So we'd love to see you there. Love to answer your questions about it. People who have been through our trainings get a priority to join. And I believe our students do get, navigating psychedelics for clinicians and therapist students do get a slight discount. So be sure to ask about that. And we'll be letting you know too. So anything else, Kyle?
I think that's it for Vital. Yeah, just stay tuned. We'll be releasing more information over the next few days, weeks, after you're listening to this. So if you want to just check it out, that's vitalpsychedelictraining.com.
Awesome. So next up is Danny Peterson. We're going to do a podcast with him right after this, like right here, right now. And Danny Peterson, amazing individual, lawyer in the DC area, doing tons of really great work around psychedelics and religion and freedom. And I think he's got a really great resource, is a great resource for those of you interested in psychedelic religions, figuring out how to get religious protection domestically in the U.S. There's no easy answer here, we'll put it that way. But if you are a religion, kind of a low priority for enforcement. Even though the DEA shot down Soul Quest in terms of, religious exemption, I haven't heard of them really stopping operations. Maybe they did.
No, they haven't. So. No, they're still
amazing.
Going.
Like kind of horrifying, kind of awesome. Like I love the brazen attitude. But this also makes me a little nervous about what could happen downstream. But I just love the challenge to the federal government. Like, is the DEA the right person to be telling you who has a valid religion or not? No, right. Not at all. That should be up to religious scholars, for sure.
Yeah.
Not, DEA agents. Get this, I just learned it's Drug Enforcement Administration, not agency. I always thought it was agency.
I always thought so too. Weird.
Yeah, we checked it out the other day. Who knew? But anyway, Danny Peterson, amazing individual. This was recorded actually right as I was running out of my hotel room in Miami after Wonderland. It's like had to run. You know what it was? I was late for my checkout. I tried to get a later checkout, and I'm like pushing my limits with housekeeping at the hotel. So, Danny, thank you for your patience with me. Pretty much, I think they did it a couple times, but I just like threw the laptop in the bag when I was done and ran, so I didn't get charged more money. But I think this is a really great episode. Danny is a listener. I think he's a fan of our work, which is really fun to know. And I just had a great time with him. I can't wait to do more with him. Have you heard his name before?
No, I haven't. I mean, I just saw his name in the backlog for podcasts. I think I forgot that you were recording there that day.
Yeah, I think he made a big dent in the scene, so I'm really happy to feature him, hopefully get him more attention and more energy to keep doing it. So I think that's it for the intro and for this segment. So thank you all for tuning in. And if you have questions about Vital or navigating psychedelics, hit us up, info@psychedelicstoday.com for more. If you have Vital specific questions, just vital@psychedelicstoday.com. And we will see you on the next episode. Thank you all for tuning in, and hope you have a beautiful weekend and beautiful end of your year.
All right. Take care and Happy New Year. Yeah.
Happy New Year. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Psychedelics Today. This is Joe Moore recording from Miami, Florida, the tail end of my sojourn here for a bunch of conferences, and joined today by Danny Peterson. Danny, you help run the Association for Entheogenic Practitioners, and you're based in DC. Is that right?
Correct. Yeah.
Great.
We say of the Association of Entheogenic Practitioners, but yeah, AEP. It's a mouthful of a name, so we abbreviate wherever possible.
I remember having a call with you a few months back, and I was really heartened to see that, not only are you active in this world, but you're an attorney doing really interesting work in, I think, a really important geography for all of this case law. Whatever happens in South Dakota might not get as much of a splash as what might happen in DC. So I think it's really awesome that you're active there. So what can you tell, to start with, let's get a high level of what the AEP is.
Sure. Well, the initial seed of the idea was seeing the need for, or the opportunity for something like a bar association for practitioners. And I use the word practitioners as kind of a catch-all for people who might identify themselves as facilitators, as guides, as sitters, or, spiritual director actually is a term I'm starting to hear more, as well as shamans, indigenous practitioners of various stripes. But I had been involved in underground ceremonies for a few years, and was just noticing the absence of, some form for sharing best practices, for having peer mentorship, for having ongoing education, because there was so much secrecy and paranoia from, the drug war, from the fears of prosecution or loss of property, whatever it might be. So the focus is particularly on those who identify as religious practitioners. We're essentially looking to gather practitioners who are potentially practicable as a matter of religious freedom, but from that seed idea of a bar association, what we've come to learn is that it kind of needs to be like a community of practice first and foremost. It can't be a merely intellectual exercise. It really has to be about building community. We don't want an organization that is just a card you carry in your wallet and is only significant when you run into a problem. That it's really about ongoing engagement with your professional peers.
Right on. That's amazing. And how did you first kind of come into this space? Did you have an encounter with psychedelic religion of some kind and kind of felt a draw to get closer?
Yeah. I mean, it was purely through social circles. I'd had one MDMA experience in college, some cannabis experiences, nothing, pretty much firmly in the recreational realm or festival realm. Really, I was a fish kid growing up.
I still am.
But when I was, I still kind of am too. It's been a minute, but Sigma Oasis was a big reason I got through the pandemic, actually. But that album was medicine at an important time. So I was 34. When I was 32 or 33, I'd gotten a depression diagnosis, had gotten onto SSRIs, had kind of come out of the depths of it and was actually doing pretty well. And so, I sometimes say that I got into it to reckon with my depression. But I think it's true, but more on an unconscious level. Like I think if you had asked me at the moment, I would have said it was exploratory. I was interested in seeing this unusual practice. I encountered a South American lineage, traveling medicine carrier, and kind of just dove right in, and it was revelatory as these experiences often are. And it took me a while to start thinking about it in terms of religion, but just on a visceral level, it was pretty clear to me early on that this is what I would be looking for in a church experience, ultimately. That it didn't look like anything I had seen before, but the feeling of it was there. So yeah, that's kind of how I came in. And over time, I was already a lawyer. I was working as an outside general counsel for small businesses, startups, nonprofits. And the, and I started, for the sake of my own safety and licensure, I started looking into the legalities around this, and learned about the UDV and Santo Daime cases that had gone through the federal courts, and kind of came to be of the opinion that while the people who are clearly protected by religious freedom in the United States is a pretty small group, the people who should be protected is much bigger than that, and that is kind of the group, the community that I've been seeking to serve.
That's amazing. And what kind of projects have you taken up in the last, say 12, 24 months? Maybe more specifically, you can be general, I guess, since I'm sure there's some detail that's sensitive.
Sure. Well, it's funny, like, there's definitely sensitivity around identity, and our membership is private unless people choose to become public, and we do have a few public members at this point. But the general scope of what we're doing, we intended to be, private but not secret. This is not an underground community. These are people who want to be practicing openly. So yeah, what we've been doing is first and foremost just finding the others. That is thing one, and that's a slow process. And finding each other, finding the others in particular, where we can drop into trustworthy collaboration relatively quickly. And the way we've done that is by sort of leading with our agreements. Our website's very simple right now. Thing one is our ritual guideline, sort of definition of what we are calling the entheogenic ritual as it appears across different religious traditions. And thing two is a code of ethics. And these, by the way, are not wholly original documents. They are built, we're standing on the shoulders of giants here by using the collective wisdom of the decriminalized nature movement, of everything MAPS is doing. So I don't want to take credit for the entire content of what we do there, but that's the flag we raised to see who would be willing to support it, and having that as our backdrop makes it a lot easier to start moving into collaboration pretty quickly. And that's essentially what we've done. The main content we've done, in addition to just helping people meet each other, help people build relationships and share best practices and so forth, is we've now done 2 iterations of what it's had different names, but what I now think of as a community building practicum, which is really about having a ceremony and workshopping the process top to bottom, from informed consent through integration. We are actually doing those as participants, but we are also sort of witnessing ourselves doing that as practitioners and trying to do it well, and doing ongoing feedback about building the ceremony and a safe and meaningful container, and taking care of each other.
Yeah, that's amazing. How has the situation in the DC metro area changed? Maybe, like I've seen. I just got to meet Molly and Melissa from Plant Medicine Coalition recently. Extraordinary people doing amazing work, and it sounds like they've done a ton of education inside the political arena, like on the Hill.
and elsewhere in Washington. It seems like they were previously quite successful with some decriminalization measures. So, like, has the attitude maybe changed in your kind of personal experience?
It's so difficult to say because, the world has transformed so much in the past 2 years anyway. So, like what was normal in 2019, like is nothing like what is normal now. And so, sussing out one factor from another is challenging, because I think, for one thing, I think decriminalized nature in DC did well. It's one of those weird, like, kind of benefits of the pandemic, just as, because broadly, I think across the psychedelic community, we had no opportunity but to start talking more and to start talking more openly. And, all of these conferences went online, and suddenly it was much easier to meet and connect with people. So, DC, to my knowledge, did not have anything that looked like a psychedelic scene comparable to Oakland, San Francisco,
Right.
New York, Denver, like nothing like that.
Like the interest in my mind, but not the community.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. There were very few places to show up for. I think one of the bigger transformations, at least from where I'm sitting. Well, so, I'm collaborating with what is becoming DC's first openly operating entheogenic community. It's called the Temple of Mother Earth, in the southeast quadrant of DC, Hillcrest neighborhood. And the main thing I'd say in terms of what I'm seeing from that is just the potential energy waiting to move into this space is just beginning to reveal itself. That as soon as people start to see the 3D reality of what is possible, it's kind of an awesome moment, literally, full of awe. There's just a very strong calling people feel. An interesting component of the DC culture is the interface with government. Government's still the primary employer here, and regardless of the fact that, for example, cannabis is legal in DC, that has very little effect on federal employees who may be regularly drug tested, or at least live in the possibility of being tested on a regular basis. And at the same time, they're humans, and there are a huge number of them, and some of them have very serious mental health challenges and have explored all of their options through traditional systems and come up short, and are looking now. And so I think probably if I were going to identify one unusual facility of the DC psychedelic community, it is like awareness of drug testing measures. Like, kind of everybody knows how long things stay in your system and what their schedule for being tested is, and so forth. So it's a funny little manifestation. But yeah, it's a fun place to be. I grew up here in DC, and I don't recognize we're in the same ecosystem, but the system that sits on top of it, the city that sits on top of it, is very different to me these days.
Mm. Yeah, there's a lot of truth here, and that's cool to see that progression. And I think you're spot on this pandemic really changing a lot of things. So all of a sudden, new entrants to the space, kind of with the advent of all these webinars, Clubhouse, and a few other things, you had access to top tier activists, researchers, longtime participants and members of the scene instantaneously, like real-time communication with all these people. And it's pretty interesting. Psychedelics today, we doubled our content, doubled our audio content at the beginning. Because I said, okay, like people probably are not going to have much to do, so let's do it. And I hope it helped.
It helped me. I mean, I hope I said that in our first conversation. It was. I am one of the people who needed Solidarity Fridays, so thank you for that.
Oh, thanks for saying that, Danny. It was being an internet producer. You never know because you don't get to see your audience or anything. So it's cool to hear that. So thank you. What are some developments recently that you're really excited about, either in your space or nationally?
I'm going to give like a really sort of intuitive, maybe almost like mythopoetic answer here.
No worries.
Say that like, I see, so because of the timing we're talking about here, the kind of like sudden Cambrian explosion that happened in terms of like, online connecting, a lot of new organizations, partnerships, projects kind of got kickstarted in the past year or 18 months. And part of my background is in experiential education. And in that world, we talk about when groups come together, they sort of go through these stages of, what is it? It's forming, storming, norming, and performing. Like first there's kind of the introductory phase where people are getting to know each other. Then conflict starts to arise. People need to assert boundaries and figure out how to do things well and play nice with each other. And then that calms down in the norming phase, and eventually, you start seeing the real emergence of collective intelligence and awesomeness in performing. I think on a big scale, we're now at the storming phase. Like we've just started it in the past, however many months. Partnerships that have come together quickly, maybe coming apart just as quickly, and if not. It can be merely just sort of learning how to process internal conflict. What do you do when it's not clear that two people in your community, that one ever wronged the other, but for whatever reason they just can't be in the same space anymore? How does the community deal with a situation like that? So yeah, that's kind of what I'm seeing at both the macro and micro, in a way. We're figuring out now what to do when there are missteps. We're figuring out what to do when things are hard, when we're not, all lovey-dovey in the afterglow of a beautiful experience, where we have to come back and live with each other in ordinary consciousness. So yeah, that's kind of what I'm seeing in a way. Does that answer your question?
I think so. Yeah. One of my friends, John Dennis, who's worked with us on the show a bunch in the past, attorney in Oregon, comes from that activist background. He uses that phrase a lot. What is it? Norming, storming, performing, whatever the first one was too. But it's
forming, storming.
Okay, thank you. And I think we're seeing that big time. Right? Like there's so much interesting and sometimes really important conflict to be discussing. For instance, all the stuff happening in California with Center for Consciousness Medicine, like they're in crisis, and it's a very large community and a very large group of people. So, how they handle it, that's going to have long lasting implications. And similarly, there's other groups having all sorts of interesting crises, right? Like, because we talked about decrimination earlier, I'll bring it up again. Like, a lot of the groups are breaking off from the national organization and just operating on their own. And I believe that happened in DC, Washington, Washington State, sorry. You say them too close together, it gets confusing. But yeah, like there's fragmentation all over the place. And is it like spiteful fragmentation? Are you doing it for the health of the ecosystem? Like you said before, there's two people and they can't be in the same room anymore. What do you do with that organization? Do those two try to fragment it? Does one just take it because they might be the better leader, or the healthiest leader? There's a lot here. Another big conflict is Rick Doblin's mentioned this a few times, because there's so much room for investment in psychedelics right now. A lot of his major donors have shifted over to investing in businesses because they could make money, as opposed to just moving the needle for a nonprofit. And this is a whole other interesting debate too, beyond like nonprofit, for-profit, scaling access and all that kind of stuff in a medical context. So all sorts of really interesting shakeups, and even SoulQuest getting shot down. I thought Gary's commentary was Gary's analysis of the DEA's comments was quite interesting. It looked like they were, and this is in reference, everybody, to a YouTube video I watched this morning with Danny and Gary Smith on Psychedelics, discussing a lot of really complex and interesting legal stuff around RFRA, so Religious Freedom Restoration America Act, and or America, I probably just added that. But, if your religion looks like you're selling, goods and services like exclusively, and that's the illegal part, or controlled part, then do you get protection in the same way as something that looks more like a Catholic church or something? It's a really complex and interesting debate. But yeah, so much.
Yeah. I mean, I was just going to say, in terms of like the shift, I might be wrong on this. I don't know the consciousness medicine community, but merely watching this situation from a distance, something that's interesting to me about this moment in time is that it doesn't seem that any part of the conversation is about whether anyone is likely to be arrested for being involved in psychedelic work.
Which is fascinating,
right? Like, yeah, that is the unusual thing here. We're talking about this openly, and it's not about whether the DEA is going to come knocking, because that's just not the environment we're in right now. Those of us who are kind of paying attention to
I would cut and run and go hide out somewhere, flush everything, and run to the Midwest. But that's just me, because I'm quite risk averse.
Yeah, and understandably, right? Like we are aware. We like Denver, passes decriminalization last year, and the DEA pops up to arrest one mushroom dealer. Like, these things happen, But yeah, I mean, generally speaking, the culture has shifted in a big way, and here I got to give a lot of credit to Michael Pollan just for being on national television talking about his psychedelic experiences without irony or humor. Kind of being one of the first people to do that is created a culture where it's more okay to talk about these things in a more public way. And yeah, it's sort of healthy in a way that we get to have a conversation about sexual abuse, mostly setting aside the controlled substance piece of it.
It's an interesting evolution. Yeah. Right. In our scene, we're not really talking about there being issues around the drugs as it relates to the abuse, only insofar as like the drugs and the controlled nature of them forces us to be a little more self-reliant than a normal person outside the realm of these controlled arenas, maybe we'll call it. It's really interesting. I wonder if there's any historical analogies to this. This seems like really new ground. The history of religion in America is fertile for study. Everybody, if you want to study religion in America, it's worth your time. So much gold.
Yeah, and there's I don't have it in reach, but I have a book actually that Gary recommended to me here nearby, specifically about the history of the use of drugs and religion in American history, which is pretty fascinating. But I mean, we do have some analogies in different forms, right? We have a lot to learn from how cannabis evolved. we also know that the shape of psychedelics is kind of going to be fundamentally different. But one analogy that I've looked at in this that was pretty surprising is so I learned that during the Prohibition, somewhat unsurprisingly, an exception was made for the production of for wine that was going to be used sacramentally, and it's predictable once you think about it, but it's still surprising to hear that the Catholic Church suddenly became one of the largest wine producers. It didn't increase like 10%, it increased like 300% or something, and not all of that wine was ending up in chalices, I don't think. That is a piece of what was going on.
That would be a really interesting history. I would love to read that. Wow.
Yeah.
And I never even thought
for
of
someone else to write.
Yeah, right. Really interesting. Like I knew some of the abbeys made beer in Europe, but I never even thought about that. Yeah, and like I always go back to like Prohibition generally, and like what are the implications of Prohibition? We can look at the 20s. We can look at when tobacco prohibition tried to get pushed in certain areas in Europe in the early days. And, it never worked. You've got this iron. Are you familiar with the iron law, or what is it called? The iron rule of prohibition or something like that. Mm-hmm. So like as prohibition kicks in and gets stronger, things like lower potency things become less available, and stronger things become more available. Just kind of like an economic function. Like if you look at beer versus a vodka or something, like beer takes up a huge amount of space. And if you're going to get a lot more money for, a truckload of vodka than you are for a truckload of beer. And so the risk reward ratio is you're incentivized to smuggle a stronger thing, manufacture, smuggle, get to the end point. And so we're seeing that with fentanyl now. People are like, oh, it's not our problem in the psychedelic scene, but has been sold even like 8 years ago, I believe, on blotter paper. Albert Hoffman blotter paper was found in Canada with fentanyl exclusively, no LSD whatsoever. And probably a single square of that would kill the normal human. But if you're a fentanyl aficionado, maybe that's fine. I don't know. I don't know enough to say that, but we are going to see it more.
Well, I'm sorry to interrupt. Yeah.
No, that's all.
I was just going to say, there may. Yeah, I think we're a little desynced here. But there may be something in that to compare to. Now, Bufo is not a medicine that I'm familiar with. It's not one that I work with. So everything I'm saying here is secondhand. But my understanding is that it's an extremely powerful experience. That it's kind of a 20-minute roller coaster ride into other dimensions. And that the culture of practice that has emerged around it right now, there are fantastic and responsible practitioners out there, no question. There's also a giant proliferation of people having 1, 2, 3 experiences and then carrying the medicine forward to others, possibly without a lot of preparation, possibly without a lot of screening, possibly without any integration whatsoever. And so, yeah, I mean, that might be something similar in that as an emergent result of prohibition, that stronger medicines might be kind of pushed out in a bigger way.
Right. Like that's actually really interesting. 5-MeO-DMT. I was checking out some pricing recently on some websites, and I was seeing synthetic 5-MeO-DMT. Price is extraordinarily low on some of these sites, and I wonder if there's something there with like the low dose, 20 something milligrams in a small powder, for a full experience usually. And are we getting pushed in that direction due to prohibition in some sense, or are people just looking for that stronger, bigger thing because we're getting hype from Tyson and some of these kind of questionable, we'll call them shamans like Octavio Redick and Jerry Sandoval. Like there's a lot of really complicated dynamics going on here as it results to the black markets, which could result in us losing, or at least heavily impacting, this particular species of Sonoran desert toad. I also have never used it. I just saw too much really strange behavior and result that really freaked me out and kept me away from it. Possibly it's amazing. Some people I love and trust really love it. So I'll get there eventually, but I'm just a little iffy around that particular substance. But
yeah, well, I'll say,
go ahead.
I'll say the people I know who have had the best experiences with it are actually disproportionately they've been involved in Buddhism at some point before. They've had experience with the conceptual framework of non-duality, and so they sort of had a place in their mental map where this experience slotted in very naturally. I also know some people for whom, it was just a curiosity, and it came out bad, people screaming for 10, 15 minutes straight, having no memory of it, total, traumatizing or re-traumatizing experiences. So, yeah, it's a tricky one.
Right. Now, this is something I've been thinking about a lot lately. I come from this interesting religious background that I won't really get into too much, but it's there's a lot of stigma in that community around psychedelics, and people kind of thinking of them as a cheap shortcut in that scene. And on one hand, I disagree, but on another hand, I get what they're saying. So if you spend 20 years studying Buddhism and then have an experience, you're going to bring in all that really interesting religious philosophy and accoutrements internally to your experience. And there's something quite fascinating there. My regular example is Kabbalism. So, if you study Kabbalism quite a bit, you have this new kind of interesting construct where you can kind of order the universe for yourself. And then you have this whole interesting frame when you go into the experience that might emerge for you in an interesting way. Or you just got done watching the complete series of Friends and Seinfeld, and then you smoke 5, and that's a really different thing. Right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I'll say this is a funny thing that's kind of been reflected back to me, particularly through the course of this, most recent ceremony practicum that we ran. I grew up going to a Quaker school here in DC. It was not my my family's background, but for 12 years growing up, I went into a room for half hour to an hour with several hundred other kids and sat in silence. And Quakers don't do dogma. They believe that everyone has their own direct relationship with God. The general instruction of how meeting for worship works is simply silence unless you feel moved by the Spirit to speak when spoken through. And it's only really been in the last month or two that people have reflected that back to me. Oh, Quaker, that makes so much sense in terms of how you're approaching these ceremonies, how what the shape of this is. So, and yeah, that is kind of what we're shooting for broadly with this organization. Is we're not attached to a particular religious tradition. The nature of it is deepening the mystical experience across traditions. And we're seeing a revival of that in major religions too. Brian Murarescu's book, The Immortality Key, has had this incredible impact on the Catholic Church, and Harvard Divinity School is looking at this seriously now. The big institutions are looking at this, as well as us wacky, neo-shamanic transformational cultural people too. There's room for everyone.
Yeah, well, thank you for that. I think Quakerism is really under-investigated, and I think the Quaker tradition is wildly valuable. In my kind of holistic breathwork tradition, it seems quite like that practice is reflected there in a lot of ways. And yeah, Quakerism made up a huge portion of the American tradition for a while. A really important segment, I think. And have you bumped into this guy Hunt Priest?
Hunt is a very good friend of mine. Yeah.
Oh,
He's
amazing.
great.
Yeah, I really like him a lot. I'm recording with him on I think Tuesday of next week, and we actually ran together a Christians and psychedelic thing. Not that I identify as a Christian, but I was able to get a number of really interesting religious leaders from around the country and overseas to join in this 4-week series discussing, particular topics relevant to clergy. And I was struck that a number of big deal institutions have clergy already quite active in the psychedelic space, very interested in including it. The one thing I kept pushing to them is, they really wanted to bring ayahuasca forward largely. That was kind of the sacrament of choice. And I said, that's awesome, but that it's going to be kind of hard to scale that, and get permission. But what you could get permission for is organizing some sort of church-owned kind of medical charity delivering ketamine in a medical context, and having that at least wildly lowering the cost of psychedelic, we'll call it psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy. And that could be the gateway for transforming the inner culture of the church and in transforming the inner lives of many of these people you would be serving in an interesting way. I hope some of them took that well. I think some of them actually were going to do a co-op cannabis farm to provide low-cost cannabis to their clergy, which I thought would have been amazing too.
Yeah, that sounds great. Yeah, I mean, it is wild to see what's emerging. Like, I would be very grateful to have learned 2 years ago that now I would have among my friends priests and rabbis who are interested.
Coming, right?
No idea. I mean, I had a hope, right? We were talking, like I was saying, religious freedom, and so I was like, I hope the other religions are interested in this too. The fact of that interest is such huge validation to me, because when you spend a long time looking at the law around religious freedom, particularly in this context of coming out of the underground, you're kind of always questioning, is this religious? And it's a very, for me at least, a very sincere self-doubt. And I think I saw it in a lot of the facilitators I worked with too. Particularly because, let's contextualize in our culture, the fastest growing religious demographic in the United States is the nuns, the NONES, the spiritual but not religious. And for a variety of good reasons, the word religion scares people off. What I've found is that most of them are saying no to the organizations rather than the beliefs. And my kind of line on this is that for purposes of US law, the question is not religious versus spiritual. The question is religious versus secular. And most of the things that we would probably categorize in the spiritual bucket really belong with religion as far as the definition under US law is concerned. And yeah, ultimately it is about freedom of conscience. It's about the basic promise of American democracy that our laws are generated by people to govern how people interact among themselves, but our right to worship, our right to speech, our right to do with our minds and the meaning of our life as we please is not given by the Constitution. It is merely named and protected by it. So anyway, that's me on my soapbox a little bit.
That's why you're here. No, that's fascinating. My perspective on the spiritual thing is, I wrote some papers. So I did a philosophy undergrad. It was largely like a halfway religious history and philosophy, and then halfway kind of more traditional kind of Western philosophical tradition, right? So I got into a lot of this, and I was writing papers, and one of my professors kind of it felt like I was getting shamed for calling something not religious, but I was calling it spiritual. And he kind of just like jammed it down my throat. Well, spirituality is religious activity, but it's like it's an interestingly framed dichotomy that we need to really investigate. Spiritual activity can be religious, right? It's our, I like to go back to like, what is the Latin? I assume you're the lawyer here, so maybe you know more Latin than I do. But to bind,
if it's a Latin question, we might have to get Brian on the phone.
Perfect.
Here.
Yeah, we'll get him on. To bind is kind of the root of that, and it's like to bind with what? It's like you and that, that's the spiritual project, I think. And how do we convince lawmakers, regulators, etc., that spiritual activity is, valid religious activity and deserves protection? I think we have a long struggle there. Like a lot of yoga groups could be seen as religious groups. Some people pay $20 to go to the Catholic Church. Some people pay $20 to go to yoga. It's a sort of a religious service. If you watch carefully in yoga class, there's a lot of religious baggage there. I'm not saying it's bad. I kind of like it, but it is that. And then how do we bring this in? This is my, so Gary in that YouTube. So Gary, you're welcome for all the free press on your podcast. I just got to meet Gary at the Las Vegas conference, by the way. I got a second free copy of his book that I'm going to give to a lawyer friend, I think, pretty soon. And we had a great time. But shit. Okay. So this is where I think a lot of the psychedelic community might have get a little uncomfortable around the way I talk about this stuff, because this is a new idea for me too. I'll spice this in. So, music, psychedelics, community at the same time. How can we see that as not a religious or spiritual activity? I was, having some interesting experiences and reflections recently about it being, perhaps a modernized version of Pythagoreanism, where we're kind of like worshiping numbers and time and geometry and, the universe through music and, meditation. And, yes, there's people that are just, jam, kind of doing garbage pail drug consumption, but there's others that take it quite seriously. Once in a while, I'm one of those garbage pail people, but it's not all the time. And sometimes it is like quite a peak experience that has really interesting implications for the universe. So like, I'm not trying to get fish or religious exemption or anything, but it's like, there's something there that is under discussed and under investigated. Especially when there's like musical mastery there of some sort, right? Like, is Brahms and Beethoven and Bach not religious? But modern music isn't. It's an interesting thing. I'm not expecting to convince a Supreme Court judge on this, but us in this scene, we should consider these things.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'll start with my hypothesis on your policy question of like how we convince them, and I think the answer is it has nothing to do with what happens in courtrooms and everything to do with what happens in the public forum. It is about let's stop I would love to stop having a question about is it religious and just talk about the religious experiences that people are definitely having. When you talk to people one-on-one, it is very transparent to me, like if someone has had they've been to the mountaintop in one form or another, like they're going to be windswept in a certain way. You can feel it on them. And it doesn't matter whether, so here's another piece of this too, right? Like one question that we don't have to reckon with as much under the laws as we used to, but there was something of a question of the centrality of a practice to the religious belief broadly. And so, we're asking ourselves, you have a religion or you have religious beliefs, but the government wants to know, do you really need to do this, or it's not your religion. And for me and for many of the people that are part of this organization, and I think the scene more broadly, the answer is, well, it has to be because it was, that was my gateway. That was my entrance into being I now think of myself as a religious person. That's where it started, And in that way, I think just, and I suppose what I'm saying in part is that we're doing it right now. Like this, the DC measure that passed, for example, passed with I think 76%.
It was extraordinary.
Like yeah. And I said this in a talk I gave a couple of weeks ago here in DC, that and we had a confirmation from an anonymous police officer of this as well. The law, the initiative 81 didn't so much change the law in DC as it recognized what's already happening. It was already the lowest law enforcement priority to deal with entheogenic plants and fungi. Now we're saying that it is and it should be. That's what we've said as a city. And in a way, I guess that's the analogy that I'm going for here. This is already religious. Now we're just saying so.
I love it. Kind of inspired to do something locally. But at the same time, I don't necessarily want the attention locally. I like being quite anonymous in my town. Well, maybe it's that I think I'm anonymous and I'm not, but who knows? I know there's active churches in my town, and it's only a town of 4,000 people. It's insane. And what would that do? Do some interesting things, I think. So I got some thinking to do on this flight coming up. Danny, I'm going to have to get out of this hotel room here in a minute, but I wanted to give you a few in case you wanted to pitch anything or talk about anything that's going on in your scene. But I imagine this is not going to be the only time you're on. I'd love to have you on more often.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, I mean, I'm not here to pitch anything in particular, but it maybe the right thing to do is simply to kind of encourage you, or at least anyone who's similarly situated, right? Like the goal of this organization is expanding safe access, period. Of entheogenic experience, and thus fundamentally religious, but expanding safe access is the thing. And I did some back of the envelope math a couple of months ago, and I came up with the idea that basically if every single American, 330 million people, were to have access to a single psychedelic experience in their life with good practitioners, safe environment, in a container that is meaningful to them in particular, including, for example, I'm not a classical music person. I don't want those in my ceremonies. But to have that accessible to everyone means that we need about 10,000 churches. We need basically one entheogenic community of practice there are about 20,000 towns and cities in the United States. So one in every other town or city gets us there. We're here to support that.
I love it. And where can people find you?
AEP.community is the website, and we're on Telegram as well. That's where we're primarily active.
Right on.
And that's the gateway. We can go from there.
All right, Danny Peterson, this has been amazing, and can't wait to do more. I really thank you for what you're up to, and hope we can keep it going.
Likewise, Joe. It's been a pleasure. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks.